Miss Richards, we have Perry Hill, do we? Sorry,
we
Perry Evans.
Have Perry
I
Evans.
do beg Mr. Evans' pardon, and you want to be called Perry.
Yes.
So if I'd missed off the surname, I would have been entirely right. I'm sorry.
Please state your full name.
Perry Allen Evans.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Perry, you were diagnosed, I think, as a young child with haemophilia A, classified as mild.
That's correct, yes.
And prior to the infection that we're going to come on to talk about, I think you led a pretty active childhood.
I did, yes.
What kind of things did you do?
So normal boy things, just running around, playing. Certainly at school I did many sports, even though I was advised not to, but boys will be boys, and so I played football and cricket and volleyball and basketball, and I did expeditions and stuff like that.
And you were under the care of the Hammersmith Hospital from the 1960s through to 1984?
That's correct, yes.
And then from 1985 you came under the care of the Royal Free Hospital in London under Professor Christine Lee and her team there?
That is correct, yes.
Now, you regularly received blood products during your childhood and young adulthood?
I did, yes. I received cryoprecipitate as a child up until the 70s.
And I think we can have a look at the record from the haemophilia database. It's 1212002, please, Paul. And if you go down a couple of pages, please, Paul. That's it. If you, the next page, please. That's it. Thank you. So we can see, Perry, if you look at the screen, look at the bottom of that first screen, we can see 1969 through to 1971, a record of you receiving cryoprecipitate.
Yes.
And then we can see from 1974 onwards, and if we look up through to the 1980s, we see you receiving a variety of different factor products.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. If we could just leave that on screen for a moment, please, Paul. What advice or information, if any, was given, as far as you know, to your parents about the risks of any of these products?
There was, as far as I was aware, there was never any advice given associated with the risks to these products.
What about to you? You turned 18, I think, in 1979 or thereabouts?
Yeah.
What information or advice was given to you then as a young adult?
Again, no advice associated with the risks of these products.
And we can see from this record that the type of product given to you changed from time to time. We'll see references to factor 8 BPL, and then to Factorate, and then to various other products throughout the 1980s.
Yes.
Do you recall the products being given to you changing at all?
I do recall seeing different bottles in subsequent visits to the hospital. So some bottles might be thicker and have a different label on or a different colour, and maybe the nurse would say this is like haemophil or this is something else, and you'd think, oh, okay. But generically it was the factor rate that was missing from my body, so it never kind of struck a chord with me to think, why are they changing the products all the time? In hindsight, I assume that it's to do with kind of the their suppliers or their budgetary contracts that they'd made.
And did anyone ever sit down and talk to you or you and your parents about these changes and why one product was being used rather than another, or whether there were different risks associated with different products?
No, never.
Paul, could we go on to, I think it's a letter of the 13th of July in the same exhibit, should be roughly page 5. Not that one. Next one. That's it, thank you. Do you think we can make that a bit bigger? Thank you. So, Harry, if you look at this letter here, you'll see it's a letter from a Dr. Worsley to your GP.
Yes.
And could we highlight the last main paragraph, please, Paul? You'll see it says there, we've recently been inviting all our haemophiliacs to visit the clinic, as many of them do not see a senior haematologist regularly, particularly people like Perry, who has only moderate haemophilia and doesn't develop many problems. We have been particularly concerned because of the development of AIDS in some haemophilia patients in the United States who have been using pooled factor products which have probably included donation from people who were incubating AIDS. And then it goes on to discuss the early signs of the disease. Now that's July 1983. Did you ever see that letter?
No.
Were the contents of that letter ever communicated to you at the time that there might be a risk of AIDS in 1983?
No.
Well, could we go to the next page of the exhibit, please? That data there. Could you just make that more visible? So we have here an extract from the UKHCG haemophilia database. And if you see, Perry, date last negative, 10th of January 1984, date first positive, 10th of July 1984. Is that material the basis for your understanding that you were infected at some point in the first half of 1984?
That is correct, yes.
Now that gives the date when last tested negative as 10th of January 84. Do you recall any discussions about being tested for HIV at that time?
No.
Do you recall giving any consent to being tested for HIV at that time?
No.
Do you recall the outcome of any tests being communicated to you at that time?
No.
When was it that you were told that you had tested positive?
I think it was in August 85, if memory serves me right.
And I think you've said in your statement you remember that
Yes.
as a date. You and your wife have remembered that as a date.
Because it was 5 years on from that date, we celebrated the fact that I was still alive, and we celebrated that with some close friends.
So that was the 5th of August 1985 is when you recall being told for the first time that you had contracted HIV.
Yes.
What can you recall about that communication, that conversation? Who was it with?
It was with Dr. Goldman and a social worker at the Royal Free. They explained that I thought it was just a routine appointment. So as a haemophiliac, we constantly are in hospital for either treatment, or if we're not going in for treatment and we're on home treatment, then we will regularly go in for checkups every quarter. So I just thought it was one of those to go on just to see how I was. But it transpired that they started talking about the stuff that had been in the news about HIV and haemophiliacs being at risk. And I said, oh, yeah. And then they informed me that actually I was HIV.
That date is, as you say, embedded in your memory because of the celebrations you and your wife subsequently had 5 years later of still being alive, 5th of August 85. Paul, could we just get up on screen in the same exhibit, 1212002, what I think will be page 8 of the exhibit. It's a letter from June 1990. that's the one, sorry, June 1988. If we just look at the first paragraph, if you could highlight that first paragraph, please. Thank you. It's not terribly easy to read, but we pick it up the second sentence. He has mild haemophilia, refers to your factor level, has been HIV positive since at least February 1985. So whether it was February 1985 or, as the earlier records suggest, 1984,
Yeah.
July 1984, you weren't told until August 1985.
Correct, yes.
So you can take that down. Thank you, Paul. What prognosis were you given at that meeting in August 85?
I recollect being told that I had my life expectancy was going to be 2 to 3 years, I think, at that stage. It was unexpected piece of news, and also slightly there was, I think, there was slight disbelief in as much as I had no ill symptoms at that time. I was still playing five-a-side football, even though I probably shouldn't have been. You know, I was still quite young, doing crazy stuff, and full of life.
You say in your statement you felt numb, you couldn't grasp the news that was being given you.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a sort of an engineering science background, and you're always kind of part of my training was to kind of look at the evidence of what you're being told, and then, you know, translate it back to the, you know, what's actually happening, and it just didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense.
Can you remember what, if any, advice or information was given to you in that meeting? I don't believe there was much advice at all, because still at that stage, it was a prognosis which was fairly bleak. So there was no advice because there was nothing you could do. And you say you knew, presumably from the news, about the risks from sexual transmission.
Yeah.
You can't recall whether that was discussed or not in that meeting.
No, I'm pretty sure it wasn't discussed. They may well have known that I was a Christian and that I wouldn't be practicing sex outside of marriage anyway.
And the way you've described the impact of that information being given to you in your statement is this: I was left to my own devices to go home and absorb the information that I would die young. I'd suffer and die a horrible, painful death. The outlook was bleak and terminal. That pretty much sums it up in your words.
Yeah, I mean, it's I suspect for many people here, either for those people that have suffered, are suffering, and for those people who've cared or looked on as other people have suffered. It is a very stark and bleak prognosis, there's nowhere to go. There is nowhere to go with those kind of feelings. Yeah. That
was 1985. Can we look at a letter from the 26th of September 86? Paul, it's 1212002, and I think it should be pages 8 or 9, thereabouts. That's the one, thank you. 86. And can we go down to the next page? Thank you. Could you highlight, please, the last paragraph? So this letter, 26th of September 86, says this: In conclusion, Perry Evans is clinically well at the present time. His abnormal liver function tests are almost certainly due to chronic non-A, non-B hepatitis, which is commonly seen in people receiving factor concentrates. And then there's a reference to recent weight loss and other matters and being kept under review. Were you told in 1986 that you almost certainly had non-A, non-B hepatitis?
No, I was told I had non-A, non-B, but that was a few years later.
And if we look at an earlier document in the same exhibit, please, Paul, I think it's the 5th page of the exhibit. That's it, thank you. So this is November 1990. Could we highlight the second paragraph beginning mini haemophiliacs, please? And the paragraph after that as well, that's it. So this is a letter which refers to exposure to non-A, non-B hepatitis for many haemophiliacs who've been treated with clotting factors or other blood products. And it tells you that you tested positive on that date in 1990. Mm-hmm. Is that the first you knew that you had what is now referred to as hepatitis C?
Yes. But at that stage, they hadn't isolated the hep C part, so yeah.
But that information contained in that 1986 letter that you almost certainly had non-A, non-B was not shared with you. Okay, we can take that down. Thanks, Paul. And then I think a number of years later, I don't think we need to look at the documents for the purposes of your evidence, but in about 2004, you then received information to suggest that you were at risk of VCJD.
That's correct, yeah. I'd been exposed to it, but again, that was via a letter. I think I'd heard that there was a risk, a theoretical risk that might have happened, and then I got the letter. But again, there's not a lot of communication around that information in terms of what I should do, what kind of impact that was, what treatments I should have or explore. So again, it was just news. Move on.
So we can see, Perry, from the documents that you've exhibited to your witness statement, infected with HIV, probably from infected blood products in the first half of 1984, but told for the first time in August 85. Infected with HCV, known to doctors since 1986 as non-A, non-B, but 1990 that you were told. One thing that you say in your statement is that you believe you were repeatedly tested for various infections, including hepatitis B, mm-hmm. but without your knowledge. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. And that's just by me going back over my notes and seeing what was written. I mean, it's not maybe I was slightly ignorant, but I didn't think it was commonplace to request your notes and go through them to check to see what people are writing about you. It's only in these kind of circumstances that you necessarily need to do that.
Can I ask you about the impact then that early diagnosis in the 1980s had on your personal and family life, so the HIV diagnosis? Before you met Heather, your wife, what impact did it have on your relationships and on your everyday life?
So on relationships, it made me think that having relationships would be out of the question. Certainly, becoming a father would definitely be out of the question. And really it put a big question mark on what my life was going to be like. Up until that time, I had dreams of getting married, having a family, reaching retirement. But once that news came through, all of those dreams were gone, And the impact on my mother and my sister was, sadness, and especially for my mother, who I think maybe in the haemophilia community, mums feel it a lot harder because they feel responsible for passing that gene down. So to now have HIV as a consequence of the haemophilia, in terms of the treatments, was, it's not great. When I did start having relationships with young ladies, but what I found was that this HIV, this terminalness that I had, it was so big that I could not share that news with those people. And so usually within the first couple of dates, when you're, still trying to get to know someone, you take the relationship into a place that is so deep. You think it was always a risk, because it was always a risk that, I wouldn't feel bad for the person if the young lady, if she turned around and said, I don't want anything to do with it because that's too much, or I thought we were just going out, this is a bit heavy, whatever, what other small talk have you got? So I would never feel bad about it, but equally, I like to think I'm fairly open, honest, and upfront, and I could not live with myself without sharing that with someone who I wanted to be intimate with. So it was either a kind of very short relationship, or it was a relationship which got to a point and then it went really deep very quickly. So I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It answers it beautifully. Thank you. You then met Heather, your wife.
Yeah.
1987.
Yeah.
And how did telling Heather happen?
Well, we started going out once. I mean, I got to know her through the church that we both went to. The interesting thing was that she was never at the church that I went to, because her job was doing school's theatre work. So she was in the car all the time with her theatre team, and so she was very rarely at the church on Sundays, which is when I was there. Anyways, we met up, and we got to know each other a little, and then I asked her out, and then after the second date, we went out. We were taking her dog for a walk, and it was a nice leisurely walk. So we were talking, and I just said, I need to tell you something. And that was it.
And what was Heather's response?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, foolishly, I think I said something like, it's all right, I'm not going to die, which I don't remember saying, but Heather swears that I did say this. I think Heather understood a little of the enormity of what I was sharing, but it wasn't until she shared it with some close friends that she was living with that that she understood the full enormity of what it was.
And you said in your statement, Perry, that when you became engaged, there was, as it were, a common understanding between the two of you that you'd die soon, that things would get nasty, and that you wouldn't be able to have a family.
That's correct. And going back to this point I made about relationships becoming very serious very quickly, we started going out in the June or July of 87. I went off overseas for 2 months in September, but I'd said to Heather, I'll know by the time I come back whether I'm going to marry you. So that's like, it's like fast track marriage, really, you know. And then we were engaged by Christmas, and then we were married within the year. And that, you know, being, HIV was probably part of that as well.
There was an occasion you described in your statement when Heather came with you to the Royal Free.
Yes.
To meet the consultant and social worker.
Yeah.
What can you recall about that?
So, again, it was a meeting just to kind of have a consultation with the doctors and see how we're getting on. And I thought it would be a great opportunity for Heather to come and go to the Royal Free and see what I've had to put up with for all my life, and meet the doctors who, you know, generally nice, pleasant. The way that it turned out was somewhat different. They grilled Heather and laid it on her that the consequences of what she was doing in marrying me, and did she really, really want to go through with it? So, which was a little surprising to me, and to Heather as well. And I, you know, walking away from the hospital, I was in shock, really, and I think Heather was as well. So it was just like, didn't expect that, and that was like, that was not good. It was not a good experience. Yeah.
You and Heather did marry?
I think so, yeah.
But your health started to deteriorate, I think in the sense that you began to suffer chest infections, pneumonias, night sweats, and then you began AZT treatment in August 1990 for the HIV, and then interferon in 1992, June 1992 for the HCV. How were those treatments?
So the AZT was horrible. It's just with a lot of HIV and potentially and also HCV drugs that they've used. I always recognised that we were being guinea pigs, and I was very, very happy to be a guinea pig if it would, even in the knowledge that I might not come through this, but if they learn something and they can use something, then or discard something, then that's better for the people that come behind. So, so for the drugs are very toxic, and they have a variety, depending on which one, they have a variety of side effects. The AZT made me extremely anemic. I had to have full blood transfusions to accommodate the anemia. I just thought I was getting unfit because I'd walk up a flight of stairs and then have to, and I'm, in my 20, I think I was still in my 20s then. So I just thought I was unfit. But it transpired that my haemoglobin was very low. And with the interferon, at that time I only had a short course. I had some slight flu symptoms, but it wasn't particularly bad. So at that time.
But by the time you got to 1995, you had to stop work for a while because of whether it was the original infection or the consequences of the treatment. It was simply too much for you.
Well, essentially what's happened was that my T-cell count had been at 0 for 2 years. So there were no effective drugs that I was aware of and that I was being prescribed. And so my condition had gone, from a reduced CD4 count, down to a 0. And so the CD4 count is an indication of how well you can fight the disease. In 1995, I got to a point where I was just so tired, so tired that I could only just, get up, get to work, and then come home, eat, and go to bed. And I did that for a few months, and then I thought, this is crazy, it's absolutely crazy. So I had to go. I had to stop work.
And there was a course of antiretrovirals you describe as making you violently sick, and you just didn't think you'd be able to carry on with them.
Yeah, so there was the first generation of antiretrovirals in 1996, I think, and there was only a couple that were around at that stage, but the one that I was on, just on many occasions, you take them. But within half an hour to an hour, you'd see them again. But I don't know. I started to tolerate them more, or I managed them better, and they started to work.
And then there came a point, I think, you were able to go back to work around 1997.
Yeah.
And then, having believed you and Heather for all the first years of your marriage that you wouldn't be able to have children, you started to explore the possibility of having children through sperm washing.
Correct, yes.
You described that in your statement as a physical and highly emotional journey.
Yes.
But your son Isaac, who I think is sitting there with you, was born in 2001 as a result of that treatment.
That's correct, yeah.
But August 2002, you had a further diagnosis.
I did. I contracted non-Hodgkinson's lymphoma, which at the time, at the time was directly related to the HIV virus, in as much as it was an AIDS-defining illness associated with HIV.
What was the impact of that diagnosis on you and Heather?
So that was enormous.
You were hospitalised for near enough 6 months?
Yeah. So, having trained as a project manager, I was able to project manage the treatment and the doctors to the point where if they came into my room and they didn't have the answers that I expected, then I would make them accountable. I'm not a particularly nice patient when I'm in that mood, but it was extremely effective to the point where they would need to huddle outside my room and have a pre-meeting before they came into my room to explain what was happening and what the progress was. So for 6 months I was on chemotherapy, and then I would have a week of rest for my blood counts to recover, so that they need to recover to get to the next cycle. And so yeah. But the devastating thing about having the cancer was that Isaac was just about a year or so, just over a year. And yeah, it was hard.
But I think you've put it beautifully in your statement, Perry, where you say, I'd survived HIV 17 years from being told I had it, and we'd found joy in the birth of our son, Isaac. And then you had the devastating news of the cancer and the need for chemotherapy.
Yeah.
We've got a picture which you very kindly provided, which gives an indication of the gruelling nature of the chemotherapy. I wonder if we can put it up on the screen, please, Paul. It should be 1212005. That's later on. I'm sorry. It's in that case. It's the other photo, please, Paul.
I think you should have a spoiler alert on some of these.
That's it. That's you at the time that we're talking about.
Yeah. One of my better looking photos. Yeah, I mean, it's typical chemotherapy, and being a haemophiliac, obviously, where the cannula or the Heatman line goes in, when they pull it out or whatever they do, it's nice bruising.
We can take that.
I think all the haemophiliacs can relate to that.
You and Heather decided that you would try for another child.
We did.
A little while later.
Yeah.
And your daughter was born in early 2005.
Correct, yeah.
One of the things you've told us in your statement is that around this time you appeared in a documentary, BBC documentary called Stephen Fry, HIV and Me.
Yeah.
We're going to show a clip from that, with your permission. But can you just tell us, at the time that was being filmed, can you recall what you'd been told about your prognosis and life expectancy?
Yeah, I was suffering with not only HIV, chest infections, pneumonias, but also the impact of the hepatitis C. My body weight, I'd kind of lost loads of body weight, and I was frail and weak, and I really, I felt as though maybe I wouldn't have that long. One of the drivers for doing it was to try and remove some of the stigma and educate people about HIV. And I know that, lots of people can't do that, and I respect that. But I felt as though I could, so I did.
Okay. We're going to play that if we can, I hope. There's a few minutes.
The reason they give. But for me, the big surprise has been discovering the ferocious stigma that surrounds HIV. Medically, everything in Britain has moved on. Psychologically, it seems to have got worse. And many of those I've spoken to with HIV point to the fear and horror that original campaign promoted. They say today's stigma directly relates to that, so I'd love these programs, in their own way, to help move everything on, because there is so much that's got better and more hopeful about HIV. To help me reinforce that, I want to include Heather and Perry Evans. What's happened to them reflects the progress that's been made treating HIV. But they agreed to take part because they are aware that HIV is as much a social problem as a medical one. Perry has haemophilia and contracted HIV in the early 1980s from a transfusion with contaminated blood. He was told he had between 2 and 5 years to live. But Perry kept working, got a girlfriend, got married. He volunteered for drug trials.
And so then when we hit our 5-year wedding anniversary, it was like, oh, ooh. And so then we hit our 10th wedding anniversary.
We thought, wow, this is amazing, and well, let's see how longer we can keep on going, or how longer I can keep on going.
Heather and Perry were able to take advantage of another medical breakthrough here at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London. It involved a new technique called sperm washing that removes the virus from a man's semen, making it safe before insemination.
I thought it was amazing. I mean, given the fact that you're told you're going to die and you'll never have kids, when Isaac was born, I was just like beside myself with joy and emotion.
What I'm about to say may be surprising to some, shocking to others, but to all of you, we pray you hear a story of God's love and grace in our lives.
Perry then chose Isaac's christening to tell their friends, who mostly didn't know, that he had HIV.
I was born with a hereditary blood disorder called haemophilia in 1983, I had an accident that meant I needed a blood transfusion. Unfortunately, it contained some contaminated blood, and in 1985, I tested positive for HIV.
I mean, that's 6 years ago now. There was still a stigma associated with HIV and AIDS. I was actually toying with the idea of not actually explaining how I'd actually got it, because it is actually not important. No one deserves the virus. No one deserves to die from AIDS. And although, yes, I've received it through contaminated blood, that doesn't make me any different from any other human being in terms of the suffering and, the pain and all of that goes with it. I toyed with the idea of explaining.
And if anyone did show that attitude, you'd challenge it straight away.
Yeah.
My doctors at the Royal Free advised me that I could have anything from 5 to 7 years to live. I was advised not to have children. This was a bit of a shock, but I didn't feel angry, and I trusted God with my life. So into the future, we go not knowing what awaits us, other than God will be by our side, seeing us through. Amen.
But shortly after Isaac was born, Perry received another blow. He was diagnosed with an AIDS-defining illness, a cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Within 8 months, I've been given another death sentence, for want of a better expression. That was more gutting and more emotionally destroying, because now I had a child and I felt, hopeless, helpless.
Perry was given chemotherapy and spent 6 months in hospital. His lung was damaged, but this was the moment he and Heather decided to try for another child.
While he was on the treatment, he kept saying, shall we try for another?
You raided the fridge.
Another?
That worked out perfectly. You've got a gorgeous little girl.
I know, and a girl. It just felt like a miracle to have a child and a miracle to have a girl.
It is hard sometimes, but equally the rewards are... You can't measure the rewards.
No.
A cuddle, a smile.
Of those who, like Perry, contracted HIV from blood transfusions, 2/3 have now died. Perry also contracted hepatitis C from the same blood. He survived the cancer, but now, because of the hepatitis C, has cirrhosis of the liver. Once again, doctors have told Perry that his future is bleak.
When I was told about the lymphoma, that actually this is probably what was going to take me in terms of death. And I wrote down all of the things that I would want to do with him, like, teach him how to ride a bike, teach him how to, score a goal and all of those things. I also bought lots of birthday cards for different years. I wrote them out, which they're upstairs. So I haven't had to use any of those yet. And maybe I never will.
I've not heard from either of you a hint of self-pity.
Perry, he hates it.
When you come to the park and you see your children swinging around, is part of it always coloured by this sense that maybe you're not going to be there next year?
It saddens me to think that maybe, you know, one day soon I might not be around to be there for them.
Yeah.
But equally, it's like seize the moment and enjoy the moments.
Because I really admire this, the candour with which you and Perry have spoken to me, because it's very rare.
I didn't want to do it. Perry wanted to do it. I didn't want to do it.
Really?
That was my first instinct. And Perry was very much, it's just life. Just say it like it is, like cancer was in the 1950s. And what switched in my mind was thinking, actually, if this programme can help get rid of the stigma so the children experience a better memory of their dad,
Yeah.
that would be a good thing.
So right.
Can I just say that there was some reference to dates while I was speaking, and I don't think that those dates were actually accurate, whereas the dates that you have are
Yeah,
accurate.
don't worry about that.
Okay.
We understand. After the birth of your daughter in January 2005, you, because of the chemotherapy, because of the compromised immune system, you experienced, I think, a range of chest infections, pneumonia. You were admitted to hospital. And then April 2005, with a particular lung condition, you were diagnosed.
Yep.
Bronchiectasis.
Bronchiectasis.
Yep. And then 2006, you started on a new drug, Truvada. And then you began to experience stomach pains.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
So periodically I'd get these incredible cramps, which weren't normal cramps, but they were excruciating, kind of double up pain, and then they would subside, and the hospital couldn't really find out what was going on, and then until August 1998, when I
2008.
2008, sorry, yeah, when I was taken into hospital.
Just prior to that, I think you'd also started receiving treatment for the hepatitis C, is that right?
Yes,
With
yes.
interferon
And ribavirin.
and ribavirin,
Yes.
48 weeks.
Yes.
What was that like?
That was worse than the chemo. It just sucks the very life out of you, physically. It's okay for the first few weeks because your body's getting used to it, but you soon get on a very low trajectory down, and it's not only physical but it's mental. You're depressed. You haven't got any energy. You haven't got anything. You're short-tempered, and like. But I didn't. I couldn't contemplate stopping. I'm not the type of person to stop. That might be a good thing. It might be a bad thing. And so I just carried on. But then I did have to stop after 43 weeks because I got some complications whereby I started to manifest a decompensated liver and ascites and portal hypertension. So like a whole raft of liver disease-related illnesses. So.
And then August 2008, you were admitted to hospital and placed in intensive care and in an induced coma. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, very little. I was going to say very little because I was asleep at the time. I have it on good authority that I was talking rubbish before they took me off to the theatre, apparently because I had some sepsis at the time, and my heart stopped when I was on the theatre table. They did a laparotomy on me, and they took out what they could, but it all came out in one lump because it was all fused together. They found a bit of debris in there, like something had burst out of my guts, and they cleaned it out, and they thought, well, we can't see anything, we better put them all back together again. So they did that, put it all back in, sewed me up, and put me onto ICU. Unfortunately, once they wanted to take me out of the induced coma, I didn't want to come out of the induced coma. So then they started to get a bit worried. And our vicar, who's now a bishop, actually, he came and visited, and I had my funeral arranged.
And I think we've got a picture, it's the other picture that we had up, Paul, you've provided us with, which is you in hospital during this time when you were in a coma. And
It's lovely.
you weren't expected to survive.
No. And I was missing the Olympics as well at the same time.
I think you spent quite a few weeks in hospital.
Yeah.
And months of recovery.
Yeah. And I cried when I came out because I didn't think I would come out.
You did manage to return to work, I think, in 2010.
I did.
And you had a further course of treatment for the Hep C.
I did.
In 2015, which resulted in the virus clearing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's not been the end in terms of health problems. You've had subsequent hospital readmissions.
Yep. So right now, so like every day's an exciting day health-wise. So you don't know what your nights are going to be like, whether you're going to still have night sweats. So my liver is cirrhotic, and so I have to be constantly aware of things that may or may not be going wrong. My lungs are extremely damaged because of the bronchiectasis, and as a consequence of that, I had a couple of years ago a number of infections, but particularly on 2 occasions, the infection was in and around where the scarring in my lungs was, which then resulted in bleeding into my lungs, which then meant that I was generating a lot of fresh blood. So, which is not a particularly good thing if you're a haemophilia.
And you've described all the side effects, or some of the side effects of the many treatments and drugs you've had to have.
Yeah.
Vomiting, osteoporosis,
Parosis.
anemia, memory gaps, tiredness, fatigue, dizziness.
Yeah.
What about overall the emotional and mental impact of everything that you've been recounting to us?
Good question. Emotionally, I think that what it's done is actually sharpen my sense for life and relationships. I tend, and have tended for a while now, to not worry about small talk so much. And I have tried, although I'm not particularly great at this, but tried to, for those people that I have invested in and for those people that I get to meet, I will give them time, because I think relationships is something that is worthwhile, and life gets in the way of relationships sometimes. And when you go through near-death experiences, for me anyway, it kind of rebalances, it kind of puts things in a different perspective. So I tend not to worry so much about things that I probably should worry about, but I tend to worry more about people and whether I'm being honest and true to them. The other thing about emotional impact is for a while at the beginning of all of my illnesses or my infections, we didn't share the news with many people because we didn't want to be always the people who had HIV. We didn't want it to be the sole conversation that we had, because that would be boring, that would be wearing, and we hoped we were a bit more interesting than that. But there is a definite impact and cost to your friends when you share stuff. And whilst I'm, and many of you, are the ones going through those illnesses, and also those who are no longer here, there is a huge impact on family, because they carry you, and but the focus is always on the patient, the person who's suffering. But I know that I won't be here without friends and family.
Can I ask you about your work and career,
Yeah.
and how that's been affected by your diagnoses and your illnesses?
Yep. I have a fantastic job. I'm not there. I'm off sick at the moment. It's challenging. It's interesting. It's intellectually demanding, and it's great. I loved it, and I felt as though I was making a difference, and I was doing well. But my illnesses have meant that I work for, it's a global organisation, and there are always opportunities to go overseas. And in fact, there's kind of some expectation that you will go overseas, so that it's part of your career progression. But that's never been a practical option for me. One, because of the medical treatment overseas, and two, because of my health not being sustainable to do that. So yeah, and work has been extremely supportive, in as much as they've stood by me, so, and they understand. So, but it's slightly disappointing that I've missed out on certain career progression, and also probably associated with that some financial remuneration as well. But hey ho, that's life.
On the question of travelling abroad, you and the family went on holiday to the States, to Disneyland in 2014.
We did.
What happened?
I had previously, with work, gone to America, and this was during the time of you needed to declare your HIV status because it is a communicable disease. So before you went, you needed to get a visa, and then associated with that visa, you needed to demonstrate you were going to come back and you weren't going to be a burden on the American state, etc. In of itself, it's not an easy process, but you can do it. In 2014, the visa restriction had been removed, and so we went on holiday to Florida. We were fortunate to have that opportunity, and I thought it'd be fine. So I didn't have a visa. I didn't go for a visa because there was no need, because it wasn't a communicable disease listed on their entry criteria. But because of my previous visas on their system, they pulled me to one side. Heather and the kids were left in luggage reclaim or customs or somewhere, and I was taken round into a room and held there for half an hour while they tried to see whether I was eligible to come in or not. And it wasn't until I told them to Google entry requirements into the United States that they believed what I was saying. So that was fun.
You've talked also in your statement about some of the practical consequences of the infections that you have. Cost of travel insurance prohibitively high.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why it is so high, but I didn't ask to be in this situation, and it just seems so wrong that if you've got multiple illnesses that you haven't asked for them, that you're actually then being penalised. So essentially, travel insurance, I think the quotes are, a family of 4 can go on holiday, but it's actually a family of 5, let's say, because your insurance will actually be at least equivalent to another individual adult going on holiday. That's my experience.
And difficulties in obtaining any form of life insurance as well.
Yeah, well, it's completely out of the question. So.
And the treatment that you described that you and Heather had in order to be able to start your family. Yes. You paid for that privately.
We did. Yeah, there was no opportunity within the McFarlane Trust to. It wasn't part of their criteria to actually fund those things. And there was no other kind of NHS, because even though it was through the NHS and the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, it was still viewed as a partially private, I think. So you had to pay.
Dental care,
yes,
has been problematic as well.
It has, yeah. So earlier, I have also experienced turning up for dental treatment and being confronted by what can only be described as someone that looks like they've just come from Mars. So they're all suited and booted and with masks and like this. And then you go into the room and everything's covered in plastic. And then they kind of talk to you in this through their mask and say, "What's you okay?" And they'll do the treatment. and then that was it. And then more latterly, because of the variant CJD, I was not able to get dental care at the first dentist I went to, and then had to kind of go to the health authority to actually find someone within the area to actually provide dental care.
Can I then ask you, you mentioned the Macfarlane Trust.
Yes.
And you've said in your statement that you've had certain payments from the Macfarlane Trust, from the Skipton Fund.
Yes.
But you've talked about the time-consuming nature of the applications, seeing why others can struggle and having to jump through hoops. And I wondered if you could elaborate upon that.
Yeah. So it's great that these grants are made available. Let me just say that. And what's not so great is the fact that the forms and the justification of some of the applicants that you make are just really convoluted, and so you might have to get 3 quotes for something before you submit it. You might have to get various letters from medical practitioners to demonstrate you are who you say you are, or you have what you say you have. And then when you submit the claim, then you might actually find that they will actually ask you for some more information. So it's just... What strikes me is that it tends to be a lack of transparency around the criteria, and I don't know why that is, but that's what it strikes me as, and also like the level of fortitude that you need to get through the process is. It wouldn't surprise me if people just gave up, to be honest. So.
And in relation to the current scheme, the EIBSS funding.
Yes.
What's been your experience in relation to that?
Well, I think in the previous incarnations of the Trust, the Macfarlane Trust and the Skipton Fund, because they had been there for such a long time, or relatively long time, I did sense that there were people there who had understood the community a bit more and had a relationship with the new body. That isn't there. I mean, I guess that would make sense given that they're all relatively new to the job and they're new to the community. So there's not that level of interaction. Certainly, well, maybe others have had more interaction, but I certainly haven't. And
you've expressed a concern in your statement about the impact of it being means tested.
Yeah. So I don't have a problem with people being means tested. I just think that sometimes people who are able to save will save because they want to save for their dependents. If you get to a point where you've saved too much, then that will then exclude you from something that you need, because on the basis of that, then you would need to use your savings because you have savings. But you've got your savings because that's, in my head anyway, I kind of earmark that for when I'm not here. And I can understand. I think that definitely, if funding is available, then it should go to the most needy, for sure. I don't have an issue with that. I just think means testing is very is again another huge hurdle to jump in terms of like create your own budget for the for a week or for a month or whatever and demonstrate that you have no residual income at the end of it. Okay? Where do I start? So,
Perry, those were my questions for you, but do you have anything else you want to say, anything that's not been covered?
I did make a note. I'll just see if you've covered it. Just to say that I really welcome this inquiry, and I wouldn't want to be in your shoes particularly, because I think you have a mammoth task. I'd love, my own desire would be that there is transparency around what's happened in the past, so that people in the future can learn, and so that some people will be able to get some closure. You can't, I think it's impossible to reach closure for those that you've lost when they shouldn't have been lost. So I think that was the only thing I wanted to say.
I'm just going to turn my back, Perry, and ask Mr. Snowden if he's got any questions for you.
Okay.
No, nothing further.
Thank you.
Perry, thank you very much. It's been a privilege listening to you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Isaac. What we will now do is we shall take a break. I hope that there may be coffee and tea and biscuits already there. I hope I'm not disappointed in that, as I was at lunch. But some things the inquiry can't do. We shall go on trying. We shall meet again tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Ms. Richards, who shall we hear from tomorrow?
We'll be hearing again from 3 witnesses, Ms. Chalice, Mr. Nichols and Ms. Ashton.
So I look forward to seeing many of you, those who can come, tomorrow.